That doesn't work for immigration. It's always on your record. The only thing you can expunge is a first offense, simple possession drug case. But don't mess with that on your spring break trip, please. Because if you goof it up, if it hasn't been properly expunged, the person could end up being deported. Yes?
How does the clock reset if someone is on parole, but say the actual criminal activity was like 30 years ago, but they only recently gotten out of jail?
They would be deported.
Okay.
If you had a 30-year prison sentence, it would almost definitely be something that would make you deportable.
Well, what if it wasn't like?
Okay. Well, let's back.
Yeah. Well, I'll see an immigration attorney.
Okay. Yes, but let's say that I committed an offense that doesn't make me deportable, and I committed it 6 years ago, but I was put on probation for 3 years, so that the first 2 years of the probation period run into the 5 years that they're really looking closely at. That's a negative factor, but it doesn't mean I can't become a citizen. It just means I want to bring in all of those documents that I talked about, like character references and proof of volunteering and so on. So that would be an example where if I'm sure that I'm not deportable and the offense occurred outside the 5-year period, I have a pretty decent chance of becoming a citizen, even though I was on probation for part of those 5 years, as long as I bring in all this positive documentation. Questions about any of that? Yes.
I had another question too, because I heard that in the actual, if a person actually gets an interview, then some of the questions may be, have you ever done anything that would be considered a crime?
Yes.
So how do people respond to that?
You mean if they committed a crime and they weren't arrested?
Yeah, because I've heard that sometimes the questions can be that kind of fishy.
Well, there's a question on the application that says, have you ever committed a crime for which you have not been arrested? And the reason they ask that is sometimes somebody committed a crime, and it might be a crime that would prevent them from becoming a citizen. It might even be a crime that could make them deportable. They just haven't been caught yet. So they ask that so that if you lie and say no and become a citizen, and later they find out that you in fact had, before becoming a citizen, had committed this crime, they can come back and denaturalize you and cancel your citizenship and then go right ahead with the deportation. So they do ask that on there. And so if somebody were, to say, well, actually I did rob a bank last year, but didn't get caught, do we have to put that down? Then say, well, you probably shouldn't apply for citizenship because I can't advise you to lie on your application.
See you next time.
Right, so you would have a hard time there if somebody told you, actually, I have committed a crime. Now, if they said, oh, I jaywalked, that's not what they're talking about. Okay, a real crime, not crossing against a red light. But at that point, you would have to say, well, look, I can't tell you to lie on the application, and so you probably should go consult an attorney. And eventually, they'll probably find an attorney that tells them to lie on your application. But
But not a USF crime.
Right. No. So that's a situation where you would say, look, we can't. This is just a brief clinic. We can't deal with really complex issues right here. So you'll have to go and actually talk to an immigration attorney about this situation. Okay. So I'm going to run through the rest of the requirements more quickly because they're pretty straightforward. Attachment to the principles of the Constitution. Simply, you don't have a handout, do you?
No.
Are you taking notes on yours, Judy? Because you actually know all this stuff already.
Just little bits and pieces to refresh my memory.
All right. Good.
Like the born after
Well,
February '83.
You can look on with someone else,
But
because I'll
it's-
email you the materials.
Oh,
Here, you
but-
just have this one, but
Oh. Here, why don't you take mine, John?
thanks.
It's not all scoop.
Okay, so attachment to the principles of the Constitution, number 5 there, means that basically you are not here to violently overthrow the U.S. government. You generally agree with the structure of the government and the fact that we elect people, and if we don't like the Constitution, we can vote to change it and so on. That if called upon to do so in accordance with the law, you would serve in the U.S. Armed Forces unless you have a documented moral objection to bearing arms, in which case you would serve in a non-combatant role, unless you have a documented moral objection to serving in a non-combatant role, in which case you have to agree to perform work of national importance under civilian direction, which means like, okay, World War II, everybody's out there, the war, nobody's here to maintain and operate the Hoover Dam. I forget if it was built before World War II, but let's pretend it was. So you've been assigned to guard the Hoover Dam and make sure it doesn't break while everybody's off serving in World War II. Okay. Well, they'd say at that point you really can't have a moral objection to, you know, or canning food in a factory, you know, that kind of thing. So ideally, people feel comfortable answering yes. We had a little old lady about 3 months ago was asked if she would bear arms in defense of the United States, and she thought about it for a while. She was entitled to use an interpreter. She thought about it and said, well, you know, I'm 76 years old, but I can sew really well. So if those soldiers have rips in their uniforms or you need people to make new uniforms, I'm there. And the officer said, okay, fair enough. You know, at least you thought about it. You're not just saying, yeah, whatever, give me my citizenship. So, if a person has a very, very severe disability, they might not be able to respond to the question, do you support the Constitution? And do you want to be a citizen? Will you be loyal to the United States? So in certain cases, which I'll go into in a second, you're entitled to use an interpreter. But even with the interpreter, if you can't somehow indicate yes in response to those questions, until 2000, you could not become a U.S. citizen if you couldn't reply in some way to the question, do you support the Constitution? Will you take an oath of allegiance to the United States and to support and defend the Constitution? So they'd make it really, really simple, but if the person couldn't communicate yes or couldn't understand the question, immigration held that you couldn't become a U.S. citizen. So I actually wrote when I was at Bolt Hall, is it not Berkeley School or whatever? Anyway, the one at UC Berkeley. You have to do a writing requirement, so I wrote a law review article, which is in the July '99 issue of California Law Review, looking at litigation strategies for overcoming this for people with very severe disabilities. But totally unrelated to my law review article, the next year Congress actually put in an exemption to the oath requirement if you have a very severe disability, that the oath can be waived. So you don't have to indicate that you're willing to take this oath of allegiance if by reason of a very severe disability you're unable to communicate that understanding of it. So nobody has to wade through my law review article anymore. It was fun writing it, but it's totally obsolete, and I was glad that it is. Problem solved. Now, number 6, everybody becoming a citizen has to pass an exam in English unless they're qualified for one of the 2 exemptions. The English exam consists of being interviewed about your application in English. How many kids do you have? Are you married? How many times have you been married? How many people live with you? When's the last time you traveled outside the United States? The officers will slow down and they'll repeat the question or sometimes rephrase it if the person doesn't understand it, but most applicants do have to take their interview in English and do have to respond to these questions. So that's the oral spoken English part of the exam. The reading and writing, for anybody who's applying now, they'll be taking the new test. The old test, the last day to apply and be able to take the old test was September 30th last year, so forget about that. The new test, the reading and writing consists of 2 vocabulary lists, and there's like 40 or 50 words in each one. And so you are asked to read a sentence made up of those words, not all of them, some of them, and write a sentence made up of those words. So the question might be, who was the first president of the United States? And then you write out, and then the officer will say, now I want you to write, George Washington was the first president of the United States. Okay, so all those are words from the vocabulary list. And these are on uscis.gov. If you